The life and sad ending of Edith Fellows. Edith Marilyn Fellows was born on May 20, 1923, in Boston, Massachusetts, the only child of Willis and Harriet Fellows. Her mother abandoned her a few months after her birth. At the age of 2, she moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, with her father and her paternal grandmother, Elizabeth Fellows. As a toddler, she took dancing lessons to correct her pigeon-toed walk. At the age of 4, she was spotted by a supposed talent scout who arranged a Hollywood screen test for $50. She and her grandmother traveled to Hollywood by train to discover they had been swindled. While her grandmother worked as a housecleaner, she stayed with a local family whose son worked as an extra in movies. She accompanied him to the studio one day. Without being asked, she began dancing and singing in front of the bemused director. When the boy became ill a few days later, the studio sent the message, "Send the girl." She was soon cast in comedian Charlie Chase's film Short Movie Night, 1929, playing Charlie's brat daughter on a family outing to the movies. Additional screen roles soon followed, including Daddy Longlegs, 1931, the writer of Death Valley, 1932, two Our Gang comedies, Shivering Shakespeare, 1930, and Mush and Milk, 1933, and Jane Eyre, 1934, for Monogram Pictures, in which she played Mr. Rochester's ward, a precocious matchmaker trying to bring together her guardian and Jane. That same year, Fellows appeared with W.C. Fields in Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch, playing Australia Wiggs, one of 5 children being brought up in a shanty town by their poverty-stricken mother whose husband had deserted her. By 1935, she had made over 20 films and was ready for a breakthrough. In 1935, Fellows appeared in Gregory Le Cave's She Married Her Boss, 1935, as Melvin Douglas' deceitful daughter who is tamed when Claudette Colbert spanks the daylight out of her with a hairbrush. Her performance landed her a 7-year contract with Columbia Pictures and she became a star at the age of 12. With her first Columbia films, One Way Ticket, and So They Were Married, and Tugboat Princess, she continued to be typecast as the orphan or street urchin. In the fall of 1936, her popularity was helped significantly by her co-starring role opposite Bing Crosby in Pennies from Heaven, playing a tough, precocious orphan protected by Crosby's singing vagabond. Throughout these years, Fellows' grandmother ran her life and career with an iron hand, not allowing her to play with her friends. Eventually, her grandmother isolated her from anyone who might present a negative influence, which appeared nearly everyone, including her father, whom her grandmother sent packing after he joined them in California. In the mid-1930s, Edith's mother arrived at her house after being gone for over a decade, saying she had come for her daughter, and her movie earnings. In the coming months, a bitter custody battle took place, covered by newspapers nationwide in the summer of 1936. Edith's mother made outrageous claims, saying the girl was abducted by her grandmother, a charge taken seriously in the wake of the Lindbergh kidnapping 4 years earlier, and that her father once tried to sell her to a dancing school. Edith later recalled having mixed emotions about having to choose between a domineering grandmother and a mother who seemed cold and a little tough. When asked by the court, she chose her grandmother, testifying that she was not used to loving strangers. The judge awarded custody of Edith to her grandmother and ordered her earnings placed in trust. Fellows continued to make films through the early 1940s, but she was no longer a child, and demand for diminutive grown-up film actresses was negligible. She wrote the story for what became her last Columbia picture, her first beau, and included a sidekick role for her off-screen friend Millie Lou. The script went into production, only with Jane Withers replacing Fellows as the star, and Fellows reduced to playing Millie Lou. Fellows found work at the smaller, independent studios Monogram Pictures, Republic Pictures, and finally Producers Releasing Corporation. 2 of the films were Gene Autry westerns, which showcased her fine singing voice. After the PRC assignment, she left the screen. In 1946, Fellows married talent agent Freddie Fields, with whom she had a daughter, Kathy. Fellows turned to the stage, appearing on Broadway in Louisiana Lady, a short-lived 1947 musical. She began acting in television dramas in the early 1950s, appearing in musical comedy Time, 1950, Studio One in Hollywood, 1952, Armstrong Circle Theater, 1952, Tales of Tomorrow, 1951–1953, and Medallion Theater, 1954. She also appeared in Uncle Willie, a stage comedy starring Menashe Skolnick that ran for several months in 1956 and 1957. The breakdown of her marriage in the mid-1950s led to a serious psychological crisis. While performing in a charity show in New York in 1958, she became paralyzed with fear and could not go on stage. A psychiatrist diagnosed stage fright and prescribed Librium. Fellows became dependent on the drug, along with Valium and alcohol. The diagnosis marked the beginning of a downward spiral into dependence, interrupted briefly by a second failed marriage that ended when her husband tried to persuade her to return to acting. Penniless, Fellows took a series of jobs as an operator for telephone answering services while sinking deeper into alcoholism and depression. Apart from 2 minor uncredited roles in films, Fellows did not act again until 1979. In the late 1970s, Fellows met Rudy Venz, a playwright and director at a Los Angeles community theater. Venz learned of her story from his girlfriend, who worked with the former child star, and proposed the idea of turning her story into a play, inviting her to star in it. In 1979, Fellows returned to the stage for the first time in decades and appeared in Venz's stage production of Dreams Deferred, overcoming her stage fright. The experience inspired her to make guest appearances on the television series The Brady Brides, 1981, Simon & Simon, 1982, as a telephone operator, ironically Father Murphy, 1982, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, 1983, Cagney and Lacey, 1982–1986, 1995, and The Pursuit of Happiness, 1995, which was her final performance. She retired from acting in 1995. In her later years, Fellows lived in a courtyard apartment in Hollywood with her 3 cats. She died of natural causes on June 26, 2011, at the motion picture country home at the age of 88. She was survived by her daughter, Kathy Fields, and her granddaughter, Natalie Lander.